Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Cameron. I think we are very privileged after having listened yesterday to Chancellor Merkel to hear now the Prime Minister talking about his vision for the future of the world and for the future of Europe, and I should add, the euro. So, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, please welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Klaus. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Klaus, for that introduction, and it's great to be back at the World Economic Forum in Davos. But we meet today at a perilous moment for economies right across Europe. Growth has stalled, unemployment is rising, the prospect of Europe getting left behind is all too apparent. While China grows at 8%, India at 7%, and Africa at 5.5%, the European Commission forecasts that the EU will grow by just 0.6% in the whole of 2012. And even that is assuming that the problems in the eurozone get better, not worse. Yesterday in Britain, we had the official figures for the final quarter of last calendar year, and they were negative. Other large economies of Europe are forecast to have a similar outcome or worse. In just 4 years, government debt per EU citizen has risen by 4,500 euros. Foreign direct investment has fallen by around 2/3. And in more than half of EU member states, a fifth of all young people are now out of work. So this is not a moment to try and pretend there is not a problem, nor is it a moment to allow the fear of failure to hold us back. This is a time to show the leadership that our people are quite rightly demanding. Tinkering here and there and hoping we'll drift to a solution simply isn't going to cut it anymore. This is a time for boldness, not for caution. Boldness in what we do nationally, but boldness also in what we do together as a continent. Now, in Britain, we have had to be bold. We were faced, as we came into government, with the biggest budget deficit in our peacetime history, more than 10% of our GDP. We had the most leveraged banks, the most indebted households, and the biggest housing boom. To be cautious would have been catastrophic. Instead, we were bold and decisive. We formed the first coalition government for 70 years. We legislated for a fixed-term 5-year parliament, which has helped to give people the confidence of stability and credibility. We put forward an aggressive set of plans to get our economy back on an even keel. £5.5 billion saved inside the first financial year, the one that was already underway. Welfare bills cut. The cost of government cut. Public sector pay frozen. The state pension age increased. Let me give you one example, the reform of public sector pensions. This is a difficult issue for any government. We want public servants to have good pensions. We've ensured that that is the case, but at the same time, we've actually cut the long-term cost in half. By taking bold decisions to get to grips with the debt, Britain has shown that it is possible to earn credibility and get ahead of the markets. Our borrowing costs have fallen to the lowest for a generation, and we will be equally bold in meeting our key ambition, which is to support enterprise and to make Britain the best place in the world in which to start or to grow a business. So we are pursuing an unashamedly pro-business agenda, scrapping needless red tape, simplifying planning, reviewing all regulation, creating the most competitive business tax regime in the developed world, with corporation tax coming down to 23%. We're making bold investments in new infrastructure, including high-speed rail. And while we may be fiscal conservatives, we are monetary radicals. We are injecting cash into the banking system and introducing credit easing measures to make it easier for small businesses to access finance. So my message to you in this special Olympic year for Britain is that we are a country that is absolutely committed to enterprise and to openness. Come to Britain, invest in Britain, be part of this special year in a truly great country. So yes, in Britain, we're taking the bold steps necessary to get our economy back on track. But my argument today is that the need for bold action at the European level is equally great. Europe's lack of competitiveness is its Achilles heel. For all the talk, the Lisbon strategy has failed to deliver the structural reforms that we need. The statistics are pretty staggering. As measured by the World Economic Forum, more than half of EU member states are now less competitive than they were this time last year, while 5 EU member states are now less competitive than a country that is pretty sclerotic, Iran. For every euro invested in venture capital in the EU, 5 times as much is being invested in the US. Our single market, one of our greatest strengths, remains incomplete, and there are still a colossal 4,700 professions across the European Union to which access is regulated by government. And that is not all. In spite of the economic challenge, in spite of the unemployment challenge, we are still doing things through the EU to make life even harder. In the name of social protection, the EU has promoted unnecessary measures that impose burdens on businesses and governments and can destroy jobs. The Agency Workers Directive, the Pregnant Workers Directive, the Working Time Directive, the list goes on. And then, of course, there is the proposal for a financial transactions tax. Now, of course, it is right that the financial sector should pay their share. And in the United Kingdom, we're making sure that's the case with a bank levy and with the fact that we charge stamp duty on shares. And these are options that other countries can adopt. But if you look at the European Commission's own original analysis, that showed that a financial transactions tax could cost the GDP of the European Union and could reduce it by 200 billion euros. It could cost almost 500,000 jobs and force as much as 90% of some markets away from the European Union. Even to be considering this at a time when we're struggling to get our economies growing is quite simply madness. We shouldn't go on like this. That is why Britain has been arguing for a pro-business agenda in Europe. And this is not just a British agenda. Over the last year, we have spearheaded work with 15 other member states across the EU, both inside and outside the eurozone. This weekend, Chancellor Merkel and I called for a package of deregulation and liberalisation policies. And our ideas now lie at the heart of what the European Commission is promoting too. Together, we're pushing for the completion of the single market in services and in digital. Those two things could add alone 800 billion euros to EU GDP. And they could lead the drive to exempt micro-businesses from excessive regulation, both new and existing. But I believe we need to be bolder still. So here is the checklist. All proposed EU measures should be tested for their impact on growth. We need a target to reduce the overall burden of EU regulation. And we need a new proportionality test to prevent needless barriers to trade in services and to slash the number of regulated professions in Europe. Now, together with our international partners, we also need to take decisive action to get trade moving. Now, I'm not going to give you the standard speech on Doha. Last year, at this very forum, world leaders called for an all-out effort to conclude the Doha round in 2011. We said it was make or break year. It was. And we have to be frank about it. It didn't work. But we must not give up on free trade. Let us step forward with a new and ambitious set of ideas to take trade forwards. First, rather than trying to involve everyone at once, let us get some bilateral deals done. Let's get the EU trade agreements with India, with Canada, with Singapore finalized by the end of this year. Completing all the deals now on the table could add 90 billion euros to Europe's GDP. And let's also look at all the options on the table for agreement between the EU and the US, where a deal could have a bigger impact than all the other agreements put together. Next, let's be more creative in the way we use the multilateral system. Far from turning our back on multilateralism, we need the continued work of the WTO to prevent any collapse back to protectionism, to ensure we take account of the interests of the poorest countries in our world, and to ensure that the WTO framework is fit for the 21st century. And I also believe it means going forwards, perhaps with a coalition of the willing, so countries who want to can forge ahead with more ambitious trade deals of their own, consistent within the WTO framework. Now, there are some proposals out there already, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But why not also an ambitious deal between Europe and Africa, or even a pan-African free trade area? This is a bold agenda on trade which can deliver tangible results for the world economy this year, and I'm proposing that we start work on it immediately. Now, of course, the most urgent question facing all of Europe right now is how to deal with the eurozone crisis. And this is where I believe Europe needs to be boldest of all. Vital progress has been made. The European Central Bank has provided extensive additional support to Europe's banks. Many eurozone countries are taking painful and difficult steps to address their deficits and to give up a degree of sovereignty over the governance of their economies in the future. And of course, there was the agreement to set up the firewall. Now, all of these are welcome and necessary steps. And I don't underestimate for one moment the leadership and the courage that has got us this far. But we need to be honest about the overall situation. The crisis is still weighing down on business confidence and weighing down on investment. A year ago, bond rates were 5% in Spain, nearly 5% in Italy, and more than 7% in Portugal. Today, they are still 5% in Spain, up to 6% in Italy, and 14% in Portugal. So we still need those urgent short-term measures to be properly put into effect. The October agreement needs to be fully implemented. The uncertainty in Greece has to be brought to an end. Europe's banks must be properly recapitalized. And as the IMF has said, the European firewall needs to be big enough to deal with the full scale of the crisis and the potential contagion. And Chancellor Merkel is absolutely right to insist that Eurozone countries must do everything possible to get to grips with their own debts. But we also need to be honest about the long-term consequences of a single currency. Now, I'm not one of those people who think that single currencies can never work. Look at America. Look at the United Kingdom. But there are a number of features that are common to all successful currency unions. A central bank that can comprehensively stand behind the currency and the financial system. The deepest possible economic integration with the flexibility to deal with economic shocks. And a system of fiscal transfers and collective debt issuance that can deal with the tensions and the imbalances between different countries and regions within the Union. Currently, it's not that the Eurozone doesn't have all of these, it's that it doesn't really have any of these. Now, clearly, if countries are close enough in their economic structure, then tensions are less likely to arise. But when imbalances are sustained, and some countries do better than others year after year, you can face real problems. That is what the current crisis is demonstrating. Now, of course, private capital flows can hide these problems for a while. In the Eurozone, that is what happened. But once markets lose confidence and dry up, you are left in an unsustainable position. Yes, tough fiscal discipline is essential, but this is a problem of trade deficits, not just budget deficits. And it means countries with those deficits making painful decisions to raise productivity, to drive down costs year after year to regain their competitiveness. But that doesn't happen overnight, and it can have painful economic and even political consequences. Nor, in fact, is it sufficient. You still need the support of single currency partners, and as Christine Lagarde has set out, a system of fiscal integration and risk sharing, perhaps through the creation of euro area bonds, to make that support work. As Mario Monti has suggested, the flip side of austerity in the deficit countries must be action to put the weight of the surplus countries behind the euro. Now, I'm not pretending that any of this is easy. These are radical, difficult steps for any country to take. Knowing how necessary, but also how hard they are, is why Britain didn't join the Eurozone. But they are what is needed if the single currency, as currently constituted, is to work. Now, of course, some people will say, it's all very well Britain making these points, but you're not in the euro, and in fact last month you even vetoed adding a new treaty to the European Union. Let me answer that very directly. I understand why the eurozone members want a treaty inside the European Union. But if they do, there have to be safeguards for those countries that are in the European Union but who have no intention of joining the single currency. I didn't get those safeguards, so the treaty isn't going ahead inside the European Union. But let me be clear. To those who think that not signing the treaty means somehow Britain is walking away from Europe, let me tell you, nothing could be further from the truth. Britain is part of the European Union, not by default, but by choice. It fundamentally reflects our national interest to be part of the single market which is on our doorstep, and we have no intention of walking away from it. So let me be clear. We want Europe to be a success, and all the measures that we'll be proposing for next week's European Council can help achieve that success. But we want Europe to succeed not just as an economic force, but also as a political force, as an association of countries with the political will, the values and the voice to make a difference in the world. When that political will is there, we can make a decisive difference. Together with President Sarkozy, Britain led the new European sanctions on Iran's oil exports so the world doesn't have to confront a nuclear-armed Iran or a wider military conflict. In Syria, we've taken the lead against Assad's repressive violence, and we will not let up until he steps aside. And of course in Libya, we secured that UN resolution and put together a multinational coalition faster than almost any time in our history. British and French pilots led the way together in the early hours when the fate of Benghazi was at stake. And together we saw it through, helping the Libyan people overcome tyranny and secure their own future. So I am proud to work with my European partners, and I'm proud of what we can achieve. I stood on this platform only a year ago and said that Europe could recover its dynamism. I still believe we can, but only if we are bold, only if we fight for our prosperity, get to grips with our debt, take bold decisions on deregulation, on opening up the single market, on innovation, on trade, and address the fundamental issues at the heart of the eurozone crisis. All these decisions, they lie in our own hands. They are the test of Europe's leaders in the months ahead. Yes, the stakes are high. They are incredibly high. But there's nothing about the current crisis that we don't understand. The problems we face are man-made, and with bold action and with real political will, we can fix them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very happy to take some questions. I think there are some roving microphones, so...
See a way through this crisis?
I think the single most important thing is to deal with what I call the short-term issues. There's short-term and there's long-term. Short-term has got to be Greece, banks and firewall. And if you do all of those three things together quickly and fundamentally, I think you'd ease the sense of crisis there is, accompanied by what the European Central Bank is already doing, and perhaps it could do even more. I think for 2012, that is what would make a clear difference in sentiment, in outlook, in a sense that the Eurozone leaders want to take the steps that will ease the short-term problems. But as I said in my speech, that doesn't really address some of the longer-term tensions at the heart of the single currency, which are about competitiveness and are about trade deficits as much as they're about budget deficits. And I think it's that part of the piece that needs further work and attention. And I think that's what Chancellor Merkel was talking about yesterday, and Christine Lagarde as well.
Excuse me, bankers here are telling me that they think the Eurozone is over the worst of the crisis. Do you think that's wishful thinking?
Well, I think that there's what's happening still at the moment in terms of the high bond yields in countries that are effectively going to hold back their growth and their participation in the European economy. That still, as I said out in my speech, it's a little bit better than it was at the end of last year, but it's still not fixed. And so you've got to fix, in my view, those short-term issues before you can go on and then deal with a longer-term problem. Look, why wasn't this problem? Why didn't it manifest itself earlier? You could ask yourself. There have been many years of successful eurozone operation. Well, of course, in those years, private sector financial flows in many ways were covering up for some of the deeper competitiveness problems. And so as those flows have dried up, unless they return, you're going to have to address some of the more fundamental problems at the heart of the eurozone. Because, as I said, every other single currency has at least some of those features. And it seems to me logical that a successful single currency will have to adopt some of those if it's going to succeed in the long term. Gentleman here.
Jidesh Kadia from the United Kingdom. Prime Minister, there's been a lot of discussion in addition to the Eurozone this week about redefining and remodeling capitalism, and you recently made a speech on this subject. Are we on an inevitable path towards state capitalism?
No, I don't think we are. I mean, I think that those of us who believe in genuine market capitalism need to make the defense of our system against state capitalism. And I think absolutely at the heart of it is the rule of law. It's maybe an odd thing sometimes to advertise to international investors, but I always think it's quite a good tip to ask, how many times does the government lose a court case? Well, frustratingly in Britain, we seem to lose them all the time. But it's a very good test of, are you living in a genuinely free country where you can enforce your rights and your property rights and everything else? And I think the genuine open and free market economies, the European economies, have got to stand up and shout about their values of freedom and democracy and the rule of law, because those are actually some of the things that make us safe and great economies to invest in. So I don't think we should give up in this battle at all. I think the challenge for Europe, in a way, can be put quite simply. We've got the two faces of Europe. There's the face of Europe that people from the outside look at, that they admire still, which is the great values, the great democracy, the great rights, the fantastic culture. These are great strengths for Europe. But the second face at the moment is of economic stagnation, low growth, rising unemployment, lack of competitiveness. Now, we can change that. We shouldn't be pessimists about this. If we actually deregulate our economies, make them more competitive, keep our tax rates down, pay for our long-term healthcare and social needs, change the way our economies work, we can be a success story in the future. But we have to demonstrate the political will to do it. Then we can show both faces to the world, and then we can take on anybody, because we've got the culture, the rights, the democracy, the history, the brilliant European values, but we've also got the strong economy and the strong prospects for the future. But it's the second face we've got to cope with this year. Gentleman over here in the middle with his hand up.
Kamenov, Bulgarian Cardiac Institute. What safeguards, Prime Minister, are you looking for the new treaty to return to negotiating table? And how are we going to deal with the competitiveness of periphery of Europe?
Right. Well, on the issue of the treaty, as I said in my speech, look, it's quite clear to me that the Eurozone countries need to come together, do more things together, cooperate more together in order to make the single currency work. And my view is they can obviously do that inside the European Union if they want to, or they can do it outside the European Union. What matters as a country outside the Eurozone is that there are proper safeguards if they want to do it within the EU treaties. There weren't those safeguards, so they have to have the treaty on the outside. But I think people can overdo what happened in December. The real change in Europe came when some countries decided to form a Eurozone and to give up their countries and join the Euro. That was inevitably going to mean they were going to have to sit together, talk together, work together, because they've got one currency between them. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that this process disadvantages Britain. I think in many ways we've got the best of all worlds. We are in the European Union, major contributors to the European Union. We have a major say about the single market and the work of the European Union, but we're not in the Eurozone. And that gives us the flexibility to have our own interest rates, to run our own monetary policy. It means that right now we can combine the tough fiscal stance that we undoubtedly need, confirmed only yesterday by the IMF, who said there's no fiscal space in Britain for a further stimulus. We can combine that tight fiscal stance with what I would call quite a radical monetary policy, where interest rates are low, but we're also working on credit easing and trying to get credit directly into banks and businesses to get our economy moving. I don't think this disadvantages Britain at all. I think it's the right way to engage in Europe, and where we have strong partners and strong agreements on things like the single market and competitiveness. We fight very hard. We have lots of allies. So on some occasions, we don't want to be in part of what Europe's doing. The Schengen No Borders Agreement is another example. Many countries in Europe want to tear down their borders, have complete free movement. That's their decision. Britain thinks it's right to keep borders because there is an opportunity to deal with drugs and guns and some of the other issues. So we're not in that part of the European Union. That's not to our disadvantage, that's to our advantage. Who's next? We need a bit of gender balance here. There we are, over here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Yasmin Shehata from Egypt. My question is about the UK's leadership in foreign policy. What, if anything, is the UK doing to ensure a smooth transition to democracy in Egypt?
Right. Well, I think this is a huge challenge. I mean, I'm still an optimist about the Arab Spring. I still think that that region of our world having the chance to throw off quite corrupt autocratic regimes and have the chance of democracy and a say in how they're governed is still a huge net positive for that part of the world, but also, frankly, for us as well, which is why I'm so proud in what we did in Libya and also the help that we've given in Egypt. I think the issue in Egypt is trying to get the transition right. I think that the military powers that be have to do more to show people that they want a functioning democracy. And I think they need to take further steps in that direction. I think in Europe we have a responsibility. We're major trading partners, we're major investors into Egypt. I think for too long the neighborhood program in Europe wasn't very conditional, it wasn't very active, it wasn't very robust, and we're changing that to make sure that the way Europe engages with Egypt, with Tunisia, with Morocco, with Libya, is far more positive and far more about trying to promote democracy and plurality and the building blocks of democracy that will give people in Egypt that chance of success. I think Egypt is absolutely key because of its size and scale. If the Egyptian people can demonstrate that they're on a path towards a form of successful democracy, as we have in Turkey, for instance, I think that will do enormous amounts for that region. But we shouldn't look away from what's happening in Tunisia and Libya, both smaller countries, potentially both quite wealthy countries. I think they can also show a sort of guidelight to other countries that want to make the move from autocracy to democracy. I think we've got room for one more, and then we've got a special treat for everybody. Gentleman here.
Mr. Prime Minister, what's your message for the Palestinians and Israelites people?
Right. Well, my message to the Palestinians and the Israelis is please keep talking. We had the talks in Jordan the start of this year, and the truth of this matter is it doesn't matter what happens at the United Nations, it doesn't matter what resolutions we pass in the House of Commons or even here at the World Economic Forum. This can only happen. The two-state solution of a secure Israel next to a new state of Palestine can only happen through a negotiation of those two parties sitting around the table. As President Obama has said on one or two occasions, we can't want it more than they want it. Now, it's clearly in both their interests for those talks to go ahead and succeed. And I would say, as I did say to Bibi Netanyahu earlier this week, you've got to show some confidence-building measures to show the Palestinians you're serious about getting a deal. And I said to President Abbas earlier this year, don't add too many preconditions before you go into talks, because you've got to do the negotiation round the table rather than before you get there. Now, if both sides can give up a little, can actually show they want to deal, they want to agree, I think we all know roughly what most of those end-state solutions are. As Shimon Peres has put it many times, and I think here in Davos, sometimes he feels that there's a light, but there's no tunnel. And we need to get the tunnel right in terms of the talks process so we can get to the end point we all want to achieve. Can I thank Professor Schwab again for inviting me to address you today. Can I ask two people to come on stage just briefly? This year, as you know, 2012, is the year the Olympics are coming back to Britain and coming to London. And I've got two very important people I'd like you to give a warm welcome to. The Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, and Sebastian Coe. Boris. We will stand and wait.
It's very difficult to get ahead of Seb Coe under any circumstances, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to say that in spite of the difficulties in the eurozone and the are the problems that the Prime Minister has indicated. London, of course, remains a formidable exporting power, not just of financial services, but bicycles made in Chiswick to Holland. I'm proud to say TV aerials manufactured in Wandsworth to Korea. Rice milled in Havering goes, you guessed it, to India. Cake in growing quantities, chocolate cake made in the London borough of Waltham Forest goes, of course, to France. Let them eat cake, I always say, from the foray to Waltham. And today I'm proud to say that we have exceeded ourselves. We've done even better. We've taken several cubic meters of water, London water, Thames water, the champagne of water. We have frozen this water, and we have exported ice to Switzerland, ladies and gentlemen. We brought ice to Davos, and you can go and see it outside the Café Schneider, where I opened it this morning. It is a beautiful ice sculpture of Tower Bridge adorned with the 5 Olympic rings. It is the symbol of the gateway to East London and the regeneration of that part of the city that we are going to achieve by holding our games. People of Davos and investors around the world, come to London this year, come to London 2012 to see what we are doing, to put on what I hope will be the greatest Olympic and Paralympic Games ever held, and to secure a lasting legacy of jobs and growth for Londoners. And now, to give you a flavour of what you are to enjoy in London, I want you to watch this film.
To make an Olympic champion takes millions of young people around the world to be inspired to choose Olympic sport. On behalf of the youth of today, the athletes of tomorrow, we offer London's vision of inspiration and of legacy.
The International Olympic Committee has the honor of announcing that the Games of the 30th Olympiad in 2012 are awarded to the city of London.
First, we want to deliver a magical experience, an electrifying atmosphere for competitors and spectators. The atmosphere is going to be electric.
You will remember it for the rest of your life.
And that magic begins with the venues, existing world-class venues, spectacular city centre locations, and most importantly, our decision to create an Olympic park.
It's just a fantastic thing to see the transformation.
It gives me goosebumps, you know. There will be a fantastic atmosphere here in London.
It's enormous when you actually hear you in awe of the size of the whole complex.
What a beautiful, inspiring building it is.
It's inspiring people to give it a go, to get out there and have fun.
It's breathtaking. I think it's spectacular from the outside. It's great to ride on here. Extremely exciting.
We know the Games must offer more than just 17 days of world-class sport and celebration.
Wow, London's amazing.
London's vision is to reach young people all around the world, to inspire young people to choose sport wherever they live, whatever they do, whatever they believe. In 1948, our predecessors reunited a devastated world through sport, and their legacy was the first volunteer program.
We still have a significant number of test events. It's 2012 and we're ready to stage the games the whole world can be proud of.
One of the most popularly asked questions I get is, what is the biggest challenge of being a part of a team delivering an Olympic Games over 7 years? And by a distance, the answer to that is following Boris Johnson onto any public platform. You can see from the film we are extraordinarily excited about what lies ahead of us in the next 6 months to deliver for you, the world, the greatest games ever. We're equally excited by what we're leaving behind for the next 50 years. Transform lives in a transformed landscape in East London, a new city within an old city, and an opportunity to drive so many of those social and economic bridgeheads that we know the Games have historically created. London awaits you with open arms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Seb. Thank you very much, Boris. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the venues, you've seen some of the athletes, you've seen the passion. Now that all remains is for you to come to London and see it for yourself. We will also be putting on a huge number of inward investment conferences that gives you the perfect excuse to come to London, invest in Britain and enjoy the Games at the same time. And I look forward to giving you the warmest possible welcome when you do so. Thank you very much indeed.
A speech, good stuff on the Euro.
Right.
Yeah, you saying you need to create.